Back on the Newsfeed PM, thanks for staying on. There are growing concerns over the water crisis in South Africa, aging infrastructure, lack of maintenance and criminality, some of the main reasons for the worsening crisis. Joined now by Mike Muller, former Director General at the Water Department, to shed some light into this. We sound almost, Mike, good to have you, by the way, like a scratched record, right? Old infrastructure or aging infrastructure, lack of maintenance, sabotage here and there. We continue to say these things, yet the crisis continues. More and more provinces being added to a list of provinces that are seeing water restrictions as water shortages continue. So begs the question, one, are these new problems that we are now seeing with more provinces, or are we not seeing an end to the old problems, which means we are doing nothing about them?
Yeah, thanks, Thabo. That's a good question. Good afternoon to you and your viewers. I think maybe we could start with that aging infrastructure. You know, we've been talking about aging infrastructure for 10 or so years. And back then it wasn't so bad. But, you know, in the 10 years since we started talking about aging infrastructure, it's got kind of older. And in some cases, we really do need to do far more to replace the infrastructure that we have in the cities. We're losing a lot of water, and that's aggravating the situation. But there are other problems as well. One of the reasons that we're seeing cuts and demands for restriction of water use is that certainly in eThekwini and the KZN sort of central region and in Gauteng and the surrounding regions, we knew we were going to need more water. You know, there's 1 million more people in South Africa each year. That's not the immigration. That's people, you know, new children being born and children growing up and buying their own houses, moving to their own houses and using water. So we need more water to be able to use, or we need to use water better. And in the course of those last 10 years, not only did we not fix the old infrastructure, we delayed building the new infrastructure. So we're now caught with more and more water being lost in those old infrastructures, but now more people wanting and needing water, and there's nothing new to give them. So we really are beginning to feel the squeeze. And whether it's in eThekwini, where the municipality is talking about putting water restrictors on 550,000 households to try and reduce water use, or in Johannesburg and Gauteng, where people are having their water supply throttled, which sounds terrible and is actually doing quite a lot of damage. In these places, we really are going to have to think about how do we get enough water into our cities over the next few years before these big projects, the Umkumazi project in KZN and the Lesotho Highlands project, which is going to serve Gauteng. What are we going to do until they're ready? We're talking 2 or 3 years, and we can see the problems are beginning to get really acute at the moment.
Depending on who you're listening to, but certain politicians, for example, that I would have spoken to about the water crisis would tell me that, well, you see, the biggest consumers of this resource are actually not residents, but actually industrial users, corporate South Africa, businesses who actually use a bulk of this water that we all need. Now, in business, is there no collective wisdom that can come up with some proactive protection measures and solutions?
You know, the politicians should look at the numbers before they open their mouths too loudly. One of the problems we have with water compared to electricity, funnily enough, is that most of the water in cities is consumed by people, households. And, you know, unlike electricity, where you've got big factories, you've got big installations which use a lot of electricity, people use a lot of water. And the industry actually, as far as we can see, there are obviously going to be exceptions, but is not the major problem. We certainly have problems in public buildings, for instance, schools and hospitals and places like that, where water gets wasted because the installations are not properly done. But the basic problem, Thabo, is we've delayed bringing more water into the cities. The cities have grown, and therefore we're finding ourselves under stress. What are we going to do about it? As I say, in eThekwini, they're talking about restrictions and putting in restrictors to everyone's water. In Gauteng, we're talking about throttling and trying to move water from one side of the city to another, in Johannesburg, for instance, and it's just causing chaos. I can take you to parts of Eastern Joburg where people have been without water for 3 weeks now. And that's partly because the water gets switched on and off by different shifts. And sometimes people don't remember which shift switched off which valve. And you cut off whole areas for a week or 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And this is really getting out of hand. We need to begin to manage this much more carefully. There are things that can be done, but it seems the politicians are very reluctant to take measures that are going to require hard administration to make work.
It seems, though, right now, when we talk about looking for solutions, there's only one that I ever hear of. Ask the consumers to use less. If they don't listen, then throttle them or limit them, restrict them from getting the water. Not much else in terms of solution is coming up.
No, I think that's also unfair. We do know that all of the cities are trying to, fix the leaks. Believe it or not, they are trying to introduce measures to reduce the pressure in the pipelines in an organized way, which reduces the amount of water that's lost. But as I said, we've been talking about old infrastructure for 10 and 15 years. The infrastructure has been aging. It needs to be replaced. And one of the other problems that we're noticing is that when municipalities go and repair problems, or even when they put in new pipelines, we're not seeing the quality of work that's needed. A water pipe should last for 50 years. And if you don't put it to bed carefully when you lay it first, you're in serious trouble. And we're seeing that the kind of quality of workmanship, whether it's for repairs or for new pipeline, isn't nearly as good as it should have been. And that's very worrying. No good putting in new infrastructure so badly that it breaks again. And that's why we need very serious interventions, both to reduce leaks and put in new infrastructure, but also to reduce the use at the consumer side. Yeah. We've all got to pull together. This is everybody's business.
You are mentioning, of course, some of those measures that are in place. One of them, of course, building resilience. The other one is proactive awareness. Don't know whether that is as effective as it should be. The other intervention is smart metering, monitoring and efficiencies. Are we collectively using all these strategies? I'm sure there are many more. And are any of them beginning to yield the necessary results?
Yeah. Look, let's look at the metering. If people have their meters read regularly and they get a bill which is accurate, and if they don't pay it, measures are taken, you'll find that the compliance goes up quite fast. And we've seen that happening in different cities. But, what worries me sometimes is we don't fix the basic metering. We don't even know if the right account is attached to the right house. But now we want to come in with smart meters, which could help tremendously if the billing system was working properly and if the meters were allocated to the correct houses. That's why I said we really need a structured, organized intervention which says, these are the things we have to do, and this is the order in which we're going to do them. And probably the first thing is to make sure that we are actually measuring and monitoring and billing the people who use more than the basic amount of water, then that we're collecting the money from them. And then don't forget, a lot of the money collected from people for paying for water goes to other things, which is why we haven't been replacing infrastructure. So if we don't use the money that's paid for water to provide water, we mustn't be surprised then if the infrastructure gets old. Yeah. But, those are things that we're talking about. We listen to the minister and some of the people in the sector. They're talking about saying we've got to professionalize our water services provision. We can't have politicians trying to run big, complex water systems which they don't begin to understand. And I think we have to see reform in the way that local government organizes its water supply and sanitation.
We've been talking about weather, of course, for the last 2 days, and the expected severe weather to hit parts of the country. One has to ask the question whether climate change is compounding the problem we are facing as far as water is concerned.
Well, Thabo, I said, we've known for a long time how much water we need, where we can get it from, and what we should build in order to make sure it's here. That was all designed not to deal with climate change particularly, because actually when you look at how much the climate varies in South Africa from one year to the next, it varies far, far more than we're going to see under climate change. So, the engineers plan for dry periods, then they plan for wet periods. But it's no good planning and thinking about, is it going to be dry? Will we have enough? Is it going to be wet? Have we got big enough drains? You've got to do something with that planning. And to do something, you have to have money allocated. And the politicians need to allocate the money, and they've got to appoint people into the positions who can use that properly. And that starts with the managers right at the top, but it also goes down to the general laborers at the bottom who lay pipes and who need to be encouraged and incentivized and trained. And if they don't do it properly, to be fired if they don't lay pipes properly. I'm tired of seeing people coming to a hole in the ground, fixing a pipe, and a week later, they come back and it's another team usually has to go through the whole process again because it wasn't done properly. We have to get our management better structured from top to bottom. But to do that, we also need to have the money that's paid for water going into water, and that's not happening at the moment.
Mike Muller, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on. A former DG at Water Affairs there, Mike Muller, on the latest on the water shortages in the country.